Hi. So we're at my testimony um, from 2001 till whenever. Um, so in order to do this, we have to go back just a little bit. And um, this was a time for me in 2001 where things were starting to stir in my heart. I remember one day back in the 90s sometime, my friend and I, the pastor's son of the church, he was the son at the time, now he's the pastor. He and I were driving in the van, in the company van, selling bottled water, and we were in Seattle, and we came to the T in the road, and across the street was a gentleman who was in a wheelchair with no legs. Well, not a gentleman with no legs was in a wheelchair across the street from us, and I looked at him, and I looked at my friend, and I said, "Hey, um, wouldn't it be cool if we got out of the van right now, prayed for that guy, and his legs grew out?" And we were like, "Yeah, that'll be so cool. That'll be awesome." And as it turned out, um, we ended up just staring at him. Yeah, that'll be great. That'll be great. And then we made our left hand turn to come home. Um, and that day stuck with me for a long, long time because I remember I wanted to go after miracles. I wanted to go after God. I wanted to go after His presence. I wanted to go after the things that we read about in the Book of Acts, but just never had never seen in in my life. Um, so I remember driving away, and as we were driving away, I didn't tell this to my friend, but I really felt like I failed God. I felt like this was not this just was not the way I wanted to do it, you know. And I just said, "Dear God, I'm so sorry. But if I'm ever in that situation again, bring more situations. But if I'm ever in that situation again, I ask you to, you know, to just forgive me for this moment, and I will continually do it. I will just go after it." Um, that's important because you know what's going to happen years later is this is all important. How everything started from this moment. Now, don't forget the first three people I prayed for healing in the 70s. All three died, and then so now we're in the 90s, late 90s. So you're talking about 20 years. I hadn't prayed for anybody for sick, and I remember that guy with the cold. Hey, pray for me. No, I'm not going to pray for you. You don't want to die. Um, so I was familiar with with the tangible touch of the Holy Spirit. I know what it was like to be slain in the Spirit. I had seen Catherine Coleman one time, and that time was amazing. Um, you know, I couldn't understand what all the fuss was about, but it was just an amazing time. And all of these had impact in my life. So, you know, I was we were coming now 2001. I told you about the earthquake and that miracle of the ladies' um, figurines, and you know, but God was bigger than the figurines, and also don't forget that story of the man with the no legs. So we're going through 2001, and a friend of mine had a church in Ilwaco, Long Beach, Washington, and he hadn't been pastor there for years, and they came to him because it was in the bylaws to contact or to if there was a question to contact him. He was one of the founding elders, and he was still available. So they contacted him and said, "Hey, they're looking for a pastor. Their pastor left them." Um, and then this is toward March, April of 2001. And so in this process, we were, you know, they had asked if all the elders of our church Bible fellowship would pray, and let's see if one of us is supposed to go. So it turned out, as we were praying, we would send one of the elders would go down to the church to preach on a week, you know, a different one each week, and we would go down until the Lord had shared it. And so, excuse me. And so we went to, it was our turn to go. We would preach. It was our turn to go again. We would preach. And it was amazing the times that we had there, and the prayer times and all that. And there was maybe 150 people in the church. Um, on the Sundays we would go. We would go down Saturday. They would give us a place to sleep, um, and so that was really cool. So my wife and I would go down on our Saturdays. Well, 9/11 happens, and and I remember I kind of wished that I had been there for 9/11. Even in the process of praying through, um, I knew that I was going to be the pastor there. Even when we had told our church leadership, I told the pastor first. I said, "Hey, kind of feeling that I'm the one that's supposed to go." And I had a dream one night, and it was it was I had a dream about the Macedonian guy who visited Paul, and I kind of felt like this church was giving me a call to go. Somebody in the church was giving me a call to go. So, so we told the church, and so it was kind of decided that we were going to pastor. Nobody else really felt it in their heart to go down there. But we had felt that, so we went. And toward September 11th happened. Um, I had a couple guys that I went to high school with that had passed away in that, and they were going to Morgan. They were working in the Morgan Stanley Financial Group that was up there in the thing. So in the towers when they passed away, my brother-in-law, I understand, was one of the last people out of New York during that time. So we were there having this moment, and I remember I wanted to be at the church during that time, during that crisis, and um, and it just wasn't to be. But later that year, I think it was October or November, um, we had our installation to the church, and we were the ones that were going to go down every week until we moved down there. So we went through November, we went through December, we would go down every week into this church, and we would kind of like do the things that we needed to do to pastor, to become pastors. In January of 2002, we moved down there, and I remember one of the elders meetings that we had elders meetings like virtually every week, where we just talked about the things of the week, and where we can go from here, what we need to convince. So I told the church before we were accepted that we were going to go, and we just wanted God. We wanted to be filled with God. We wanted all that God had to offer us, and I was going to go after revival. I was going to go after these things. I was going to go after the presence of God, and if they didn't want to do that, they don't need to have me as their pastor, because that's all that mattered to me. Um, I guess unanimously they had voted for me to be the pastor, so that's why we moved down there. And so we ended up going. Um, we were able to rent a place, a couple of places. Ended up buying building a house on a acre and a half of property, and I even put my own par three course up there, three-hole par three course, on the property, and it was really, really a big piece of property. We put fencing up, everything. Um, so we had this house, we had this place, and I remember thinking to myself, man, this is amazing. We're like a mile from the beach, from the Pacific Ocean, and of course, I went to the Pacific Ocean every day to pray and things. I went to the church to pray, and I'm praying at the church, and I remember this. No, I wasn't praying at the church. I was praying on the beach um, in the morning, and I remember seeing the Lord hearing the Lord, and just to pray through. And as I was doing this, there was a vision I had of an airport on top of the church, on the roof of the church, an airport that it was really strange, that had demons landing and taking off. They were landing and taking off. it impacted me quite a bit. I didn't know what to do with it. I just was like, well, God, we don't want that. So as I'm praying, I'm just praying like, God, no, we ask you to send the angels, put your angels in charge of this church right now and all. And it was like a continuous thing. Um, I remember telling the elders that by the end of the year, we'll probably have 25 people because nobody's going to want to go after healings. Nobody's going to want to go after the supernatural. And only those who do will stick around. And I remember one by one, people would leave. Um, and it was a sad, sad thing. I didn't know what to do with it. Um, although the Lord had told me, I wasn't sure how to handle it. So I was very cautious. I was very careful. Um, in this time, in 2002, there was a ministry. I kind of kept most of this stuff to myself. But during this time, there was a ministry that I was thinking about having coming up to Long Beach, Washington, to do some ministry in our church. Um, as I'm there and we're looking at it, and I understand they're going to go visit Cheon's church, Harvest Rock in LA. They were going to have a conference. So we bought tickets to the conference and we made the plan. Me, the one of the elders and his wife and my wife were going to go down and we were going to go be a part of this conference. And there were other people there that I'd never heard before, let alone Cheon. So we're down there, and I remember that trip. Um, it was crazy. It was like the beginning of November, somewhere around there, late October, November. Harvest Rock was having this conference, and so we're getting ready to go down, and it was like, and it just seemed like it was really, really good. The trip down was very good. Um, During this time, my wife, like right around this time, my wife had brought to my attention that this person, um, the wife of this elder, was looking at me affectionately and was really, really wanting a relationship. And I'm like, whoa, I'm not sure of that. I mean, I went to their place and I had some coffee sometimes, but I had no idea that was her attention. So I took my wife's um, saying very seriously because I don't want anything. And even though there was no interest in there anyway, I just didn't want anything to appear that way. So we're driving down, and we had a really, really good time. And I remember the presence of the Lord was so thick on me, and every day something was mentioned in the message. And I went to the altar before the meeting, well, not during, but after the meeting was over, I would go. There was a couple of speakers there you may have heard of. One of them was Todd Bentley, a young minister. This was before Lakeland, and so he was there. Um, there was another minister, and I can't remember who it was. Cheon spoke. I loved it. And then there was this guy, and I never heard him before, but he was a teacher. He really knew how to open up the Bible. He really knew how to open up the Word and make it real. Um, and he wasn't excited, or he was excited, but that's not how he spoke. He wasn't trying to emotionally stir you. He just spoke. It's almost like you were sitting in the living room talking to him. And I remember him just opening up revelation to my heart, and I'm like, wow, I like this guy. And then it turned out his name was Bill Johnson. He was the pastor. He still is like one of the leaders, one of the senior leaders at Bethel Church in Redding. And he's here, and he's just talking, at this meeting, and people are getting messed up and wrecked and everything else. So I said, I have to get to know this guy. I mean, I have to get in contact with him. So we go through the meetings, and I remember going forward. We went through the fire tunnel at the last night, and took forever to get through the fire tunnel. There were so many people at this conference, and um, some people were double dipping before we had a single dip. It was just hilarious. The presence of God really came upon me. He fell upon me. and it was absolutely amazing. So now, in this process, something happened in those 4 days where this woman, the elder's wife, was hostile. I mean, it was a tangible dislike, a tangible problem, a tangible separation in friendship that had happened on this trip. I don't understand it, but it happened. Um, I tried to keep everything on a platonic scale, just matter of fact stuff. There was no big. It wasn't like juicy stuff because really God was doing stuff, and a lot of it um, I hadn't even been able to process yet, so I had no idea what was happening. So so anyway, she got offended about something, and then we drove back. On the way down there, we took turns driving. It was an 18-hour drive. On the way back, he drove all the way back on his own, and you can tangibly feel the anger, the hatred, the um, the separation that was happening between us at the time, the two families. So I really didn't know what to do with it. I was just kind of like, okay. So I went to sleep, and I slept quite a bit, and it was awesome. So at the end of this trip, I mean, we would stop for gas, and I said, "Hey, you need me to drive?" And he goes, "No, I got it." And then, you're talking late at night here, and so he kept driving, and we made it home. And as we left, I just said, "Hey, I just want to say thanks for allowing me to sleep on the way home." And I guess that didn't sit well. So, you know, we're like, okay. So there was an obvious separation at that moment in that relationship between a pastor and an elder. And so um, I knew that there was problems, there was animosity about something. I didn't know what it was, but the church was starting to dwindle. It got down to about 25 people, like the Lord showed me. Um, and we were having our Thanksgiving dinner. We had some new people come. We had some old people leave, um, and so that didn't sit well with the eldership either. Even though I had spoken to them about it, um, and so we're going down, and so I'm making Thanksgiving dinner. I just wanted to stay away from people because I wasn't really feeling it. Christmas time, pretty much the same thing was happening. I wasn't feeling it, so. Um, we just went through. And then in January, after school break, um, basketball season's going on. High school basketball is going on. My son's playing, and we had, I get a telephone call in the middle of this game, and it was an elder, one of the elders, this elder guy, calls me up and says, "Hey, we need to have a meeting." And I said, "Well, my son's playing. My son's at the game right now. I'm going to stay here." "No, we need to have it right now." I said, "Well, my son's in a basketball game. I want to be with my son." And they said, "No, we want you here right now." So I called my wife, and we went. And I was really, really upset. But looking back, it would have been best to say, "Hey, listen, we'll do it at another time. I'm going to stay with my son." And but I didn't do that. But I walk in, and they were just talking about nitpicking stuff. They didn't like the direction the church was going. This supernatural stuff. They didn't really want to go after that, and we have so many people leaving. And then I just kind of stopped, and I knew where it was going. And I'm not a person to sit down and just walk it through, but I said, "Listen, um, do you guys still want me to pastor here or not?" And I said, "I'm not going to fight you for a building. Do you still want me to pastor here?" And nobody said anything. So I looked at the one elder that we went to LA with, and I said, "Do you still want me to pastor here?" And he didn't say anything. I said, "Fine, that's your answer." So I looked at the next guy. I said, Do you want me to still pastor here?" He didn't say anything. So I said, "Okay, there's your answer." And I looked at this third guy, and I said, "Do you still want me to pastor here?" And he didn't answer. So I said, "There's your answer. I'm not going to fight you for a building. I'm not going to do that. If I'm not going to. I don't need a building. I'm not going to fight you. Um, for this. I'm not going to fight you for a building. I'll fight for the people, but I'm not going to fight for the building." So I said, So I said, fine. So I gave him my keys and to the church, and I said, there you go. And then just said, I'm not going to waste my time. So um, I just said, I'm just going to ask you if I can speak to the congregation one more time. And they said, no, we're not going to allow you to do it. So I said, fine. So I went back to the basketball game, watched my son finish, and then on Sunday, I understand they locked the church, and nobody was allowed to go in. Um, and it was kind of a relief. I sent letters to everybody in the church um, that I had an address for, and I told them what had happened. And that's not what I was going to preach on because God had given me a message, and I wanted to preach the message. But so I just said, hey, listen, I'm not going to be pastoring here anymore. And then so this is what happened, and I told them, and then I told them basically what was just said, and I said that's it. So a lot of people got upset about it, but about that fact that I was no longer the pastor. I shouldn't say a lot, but the people in the church that were there at the time were, and so they all said, well, we knew this was going to happen, blah blah blah. Well, a Nazarene pastor in the town um, came by and he said, hey, listen, I heard what happened, and I want to let you know that you can use my building on a Saturday if you want to, and I won't charge you; it'll be free. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah. Um, that fit perfectly with what we were called to do, what we were feeling to do. We said, yeah, I'll be glad to do that. Um, so because the town Ilwaco in Long Beach was basically a tourist town, fishing tourist town, and then so it would fit perfectly. People can come on a Saturday night. They don't have to wake up early Sunday morning. They can go clamming or do whatever they're going to do, and they'll get their ministry. We didn't do much preaching. We just had some worship, and we started to pray for the sick, and people started to get healed. It was really really cool. So we were there, and then they said, "Hey, we'd like to have a Sunday service." We didn't know what to do, so we did it up at my house uh, for a while. So we had Saturday night and Sunday morning, and we had some people coming, and we just prayed for the sick. Uh, I remember a I remembered Bill Johnson, and so this was like all that took place between January and May. In this time period, I sent an email to Bill Johnson. I just said, "Hey, I just want to tell you I appreciate what you had done. This is what God did in my heart, etc., etc." And he sent me an email back and invited me to the pastor's advance that he was having in May. So I was like, "Cool." So my wife and I we went. The church paid for us to go, and or my new church paid for us to go, and we went. And while we were there, I remember Bill Johnson. It was incredible. There were two things that were mentioned there that I remember immensely. Bill Johnson had preached, and Danny Silk had preached. Eric Johnson had shared something, and amongst the other things. And this woman stands up and she starts to share this thing about adoption, and she mentions adoption in some states, how if you can disinherit a uh, a natural born child, but someone that you adopt, you're not able to disinherit, and God will never disinherit you. And I remember that part of the message. And then Bill Johnson gave all the pastors there a book. It was called When Heaven Invades Earth. Um, this is 2003 at this moment. So, um, so I take a copy and I go into the bookstore and I buy a case, and or I ask him, hey, can I buy or I ask somebody there, I'd like to buy a case. We got the CDs from the meetings. We even got prophesied over. I remember how they did it. They had three people, a leader and two students from the Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, and a leader, and they would sit you in a chair. You'd get an appointment card. You'd take your appointment, and then you would go and this was really cool. You would go and they would record it. It was a 7-minute meeting, and and then the next person would come up. It was really really cool. So we got ministered to that way, and I remember how I just remember that whole time. It was just so cool. So we came back and we were energized. I started to give When Heaven Invades Earth away to people. Um, so that was really, really cool. So that takes us into 2003. We have a home church at the time. We have a Saturday night meeting, and uh, and we're starting to see miracles. We're starting to see things happen. In fact, somebody came to us and said, "Hey, we heard that if somebody is sick, that they can come to your church, get prayed for, and get healed." And I said, "Well, yeah." So we prayed, and I remember this kid, um, the child of a friend, and uh, he had some issues with his lungs when he was born, and so we prayed, and I keep seeing Facebook entries of him playing baseball now. Here we are, what, 15 years later. So 15, 16 years later, that's really, really incredible. Um, just to see how God did it. But I just thought it was humorous how we have a meeting, or we have some people that just say, "Hey, the reputation is that you go to that church if you want healing," and we were able to pray for some marriages to be healed and reconciled, and all. It was really, really cool. So that's enough for this 2001 to 2003. We'll pick up there next time.